I believe in the United States of America as a government of the people, by the people, for the people, whose just powers are derived from the consent of the governed, a democracy in a republic, a sovereign nation of many sovereign states, a perfect union, one and inseparable, established upon those principles of freedom, equality, justice, and humanity, for which American patriots sacrificed their lives and fortunes. I therefore believe it is my duty to my country to love it, to support its Constitution, to obey its laws, to respect its flag, and to defend it against all enemies. Father, as we gather here together in this classroom, we ask that you guide our studies and lead us to understanding. We also ask that you protect the individuality of each student as they question and ponder your word in these matters. Thank you, Father, for this beautiful place of learning. We pray these words in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. All right, welcome back to Bridge Academy. This is Miss Cree-Walt, and we are going to start Lesson 2 of Unit 2, and we're going to be talking about American political parties, where they came from, where they generally developed out of, and where they stand today. All right, basically, I figured I was going to go back and look at some of the history behind the parties, and as we get closer to the revolution, you'll start to see where the party lines are narrowing down. You can start to see in England where specific ideology is going to separate and become what we know today as our American political parties. All right, let's go as far back as ancient Rome. And the Senate was composed of parties. They did have parties, and mostly these were in a socioeconomic hierarchy. You had the plebeians, which were the wealthy merchants in the middle class, and then you had the patricians, which were noble families. Now, of course, we know noble just means someone gave them, somehow they achieved that nobility. Probably these were handed down by people in positions of power, and therefore that's what makes them, quote, noble. If you look at what's being represented here in the Roman Senate, you can see, obviously, it's all men, and wealth, money, contributes heavily to someone's ability to be able to gain that position as a senator. And I ask you to look at it today. You're not going to see a whole lot of difference. Now, of course, women can hold office today and do hold office today, even very high offices in America. And obviously, we have a lot more diversity in who can be a representative or a senator in our Congress. But when it comes to money and power, even though that word noble isn't attached to people, there is a sense of privilege that sometimes can help put someone in that position. And with the money it takes today to run for office, no poor farmer is going to be able to really get that office without, having to secure a lot of money to get into that position. So that money and politics kind of just go hand in hand, and nothing has changed since ancient Rome. Okay, now let's jump, obviously, hundreds of years ahead to England in 1678. Now, this issue that came up was an ongoing, hundreds of years of issues between Catholics and Protestants. What you see in the English Popish plot was, first of all, it was a rumor generated to try to drum up support or sentiment for the the Protestants. Okay, you in other words, they wanted to establish an anti-Catholic sentiment that would prevent someone succeeding Charles II and being a Catholic again. Okay, so they're trying, in other words, the Protestants are trying to get power here. So they come up with this rumor that the Pope is trying to have the king assassinated. And it's all just a rumor. They just really literally just wrote documents that, tried to make it look like they were official and they were coming down. And in other words, there was like a no confidence vote coming out from the Pope's office about King Charles II. And, if they can do that, they're showing that he's weak and that that he's eventually going to be destroyed. But this is all a rumor, and all it's designed to do is to kind of unravel the power of King Charles II. And but I ask you to look at what's happening literally today, and with the 2016 election between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, and what has come out of that with the whole FBI creation of a collusion effort that has been going on. This investigation has been going on for over a year. And what do we have? We have nothing. There is nothing to this investigation. Other than we have called out a few Russians that might be involved in doing something. There is no direct correlation between Trump's campaign advisors and Russian and collusion with Russia to undermine Hillary Clinton. It's more so shedding light on Hillary Clinton's campaign doing exactly the same thing to Trump, just coming from her campaign. So do you see how confusing and disruptive this entire event is for the Trump administration? And it is very destructive in terms of how much action is being able to be taken by Trump or even the Congress to get things done, because they're embroiled in this ridiculous investigation that is turning up absolutely nothing. There is nothing different. And just like it says in Ecclesiastes, there is nothing new under the sun when it comes to these type of ridiculous charges and rumors. These are the actions of political parties, and nothing has changed. There is nothing new under the sun here when it comes to political parties. All right, King Charles II eventually starts to realize, okay, maybe there is something to this plot, okay, and he dissolves Parliament. Now, there start to be these factions that arise out of this incident, and there are two particularly that stand out, and they are called the petitioners and the abhorrers. The petitioners want Parliament restored. I mean, they want their representative government restored, and not, we're not just dealing with king handing down edicts. We want, they wanted Parliament to come back and people to be represented. The abhorrers are defending the king's actions, and they're trying to stand behind the king and stand behind this centralized government, but mostly stand behind the power of the king because they want to support his religious affiliation, which is basically Catholicism. All right, now out of the petitioners in England, and we're still in England, developed the Whig Party. Okay, and they get this name because it's an old term for Scottish Presbyterians who oppose the government in Scotland. They're extremely independent-minded people. The abhorrers become the Tories. So the Tories are the Irish Roman Catholics. Now, once we get to America, people in Europe and in England, because of these religious epic battles that are going on, are trying to flee this chaos. A lot of Protestants said, forget it, we're out of here, and we're going to take that trek across the ocean, and we're going to go to this new world, and we're going to have peace. We are no longer going to have this chaos. We don't want this chaos, and we're willing to take that risk in the new world. So coming over primarily for religious freedom. The American founders did not like these factions. They think that they were good influences on politics. And James Madison, primary author of the Constitution, writes, "The public good is disregarded in the conflicts of rival parties, and measures are too often decided not according to the rules of justice and the rights of the minor party, but of the superior force of an interested and overbearing majority." And that's taken from Federalist number 10. So this is right after they have written the Constitution and they're wanting it to get ratified. What Madison is saying here is that he doesn't want to see the justice and the rights of the minority to be overpowered by the interest of an overbearing majority. In other words, even one man has certain rights, and those are never to be taken away from that man by an overbearing majority. That's what a pure democracy can do. So, and they are just coming off the creation of this government that is a constitutional republic, okay? And it is very important to Madison that the law is supreme and not men. Henceforth, why you see this resistance to political parties coming in and trying to overpower the political system, because their ideology starts to overpower the law. And these founders did not want to see that happen. They did not want to see the Constitution kicked out, okay? And then other forces coming in and being superior to the constitutional law. All right, despite the best intentions, naturally political parties began to grow in America. And a political party can be defined as a group of voters organizing to support certain public policies that will align with a certain ideology and whose aim is to elect officials who will carry out the party's policies. The party's policies, or what you usually typically hear referred to as the party platform, are basically just the ideas, the ideology, and the public policies they feel like they're most important to them, and they want these to be the guiding principles of the candidate that they choose. Okay, let's start getting into the history of American political parties. And we're talking about the late 1700s, obviously after the Revolution has been won. George Washington and John Adams served 2 terms as president and vice president, and they had no party affiliations. Okay, so George Washington and his vice president, John Adams, did not run under any party ticket. There was no parties at this time. So you've got 8 years of leadership without political parties. But it doesn't take long for these political parties to start to bubble up. John Adams runs under what he calls, or what they call, the Federalist Party. Okay, and it is considered the first political party in America. And primarily, they are supportive of strong central government. They're represented primarily by northern businessmen, bankers, and merchants. And they're there to protect capital and industry. Remember, America is taking off economically. And so there's a lot of economic activity to protect here. And the Federalists are there saying, we need a more centralized government. Obviously, they're the ones, the Federalists being the ones that supported the Constitution because it created this centralized government. Now, after Adams' first term, he meets a challenger, and it's Thomas Jefferson. And you know Thomas Jefferson is an anti-federalist. Now, they didn't run under the anti-federalist name, but these were, in effect, those that were opposed to the Constitution to begin with, because they were worried about this Bill of Rights not being part of the Constitution. So, but they did get their Bill of Rights. But nevertheless, they are opposing this strong central government, and you can understand how that naturally fell into place with those who were the anti-federalist. What they ended up calling themselves was Democratic Republicans. And Thomas Jefferson won the presidency under that party affiliation in 1800. And for the most part, they're promoting the least amount of government control possible. They want the states and local governments to self-govern, and it's primarily made up of planters, small farmers, and artisans. All right, in the 1820s, we're moving on quite a bit here. The political parties are developing, and the primary point of contention here starts to become slavery, because it's a festering issue. The North is starting to abandon this. The abolitionists are very successful, but it still remains unresolved. Okay, and the political parties are going to splinter into different names that reflect their agendas. So the abolitionists are really being effective here. And their primary goal is to remove the scourge of slavery from America. All right, and here's where the schism starts to get drawn. In the West, the frontier farmers, and the South, the slave-holding states, the ones primarily that are holding slaves, become the Democrats. Okay, they have dropped the Democrat-Republican name, and they have become just the Democrats. And they are headed up by Andrew Jackson, who served 1828 to 1836. Now, in the North, you have the manufacturing and the banking, and they become the National Republicans, or the Whig Party, the Whigs. And they're headed up by, they served some time under William Henry Harrison from 1840 to 1844. And as you can see, we are approaching the time of the Civil War at this point. These names really present some almost confusing messages, because you have the Anti-Federalists, who really were very much like the Whigs. Remember, the Whigs are those Scottish Presbyterians that are vehemently opposed to government. They're extremely independent. The manufacturing and banking and centralized government becomes this Republican, National Republicans Party, or the Whig Party, okay, that still, that are taking on this name that is associated with less government. But the Democrats over there on the left, they are the role of the Southerners, who were extremely independent and didn't want this centralized government. But at the same time, they're promoting slavery, which was a violation of a very basic right. Basically everything that the Bill of Rights represents. So it's very interesting to me. What I think happened is that you have a fracture in the Anti-Federalists, and they are breaking up. This is what's happening. They are breaking up, and what's happening is that you have the Democrats in the South that are favoring slavery because they're trying to hold on to that economic power. And then you have an emergence of those Anti-Federalists that really believed in freedom, and they believed in that Bill of Rights. Those Anti-Federalists that really pushed for that, and they're joining with the Federalists over here, being the National Republicans and the Whigs. There's a lot of study that can go into this. I think it's extremely interesting. But, when you start looking at names, and names mean something. So I think what you see here is a split in the Anti-Federalist Party. Now, 1854, you start to see this schism has become full-blown now. But what it has created is complete chaos, because now we have four parties, okay? Nobody's quite sure where they belong. I think what happens is things heat up so much, and there's one issue at the table here, and it is slavery. And everyone else is trying to figure out, do I even want to get into that debate, or do I just represent something totally different? So, but it's hard to look at these parties and kind of see where their loyalties lie, except, of course, for the abolitionists. Their initial goal was to abolish slavery, and they are not stopping until they get this done. So the abolitionists and the Free Soil Party, which obviously related ideologies, are going to combine into the Republican Party. And this is where Abraham Lincoln rises. And your history tells you that, of course, Abraham Lincoln was elected. There was a civil war. We did end slavery as a result of that civil war. He is elected before the Civil War. The Civil War is fought. It carries over into his second term, and of course, he's not able to finish out that second term because he was assassinated in 1865. Okay, now that's the one of the four parties. Over on the right, you had his opponent, Stephen A. Douglas, and he represented the Northern Democrats, which they're slightly different from down there below the Southern Democrats. The Northern Democrats supported territorial sovereignty to determine slavery because Congress, remember, under the Constitution, Congress can set laws for the territories. They're not allowed to get in and control the states, but they did have control over the territories. So, and he was supporting the fact that these territories need to have their own independence. But that's not how it's written in the Constitution. So they're proposing something that is basically unconstitutional, and they're also supporting that with their party. The Southern Democrats are just all out. They want to keep slavery, they want their state sovereignty, and they are ready to secede. Now, the Whig Party is interesting. It wasn't very strong, but this is the Whig Party, or remember, they were called the National Republicans. They get renamed into the Constitution Party, the Constitutional Union Party. And I think they're pretty much aligning with the abolitionists, but they're backing off this argument. And this argument is so strong and so heavily debated at this time that they just kind of fall away because they're not participating in this discussion. They are not actively supporting the abolitionists. Okay, we're going to jump forward to Reconstruction. So from the Civil War forward to the 1930s. Now, this party, this Republican Party started by Abraham Lincoln, who was the first to run under that party banner, dominates politics. And you can see why, because the South was extremely weakened by having lost the Civil War. You know, they are just doing everything they can to get back on their feet. But the North is industrializing. Okay, they are under this process of industrialization, and they're just steamrolling ahead. And innovations are just coming out of the nation one after another. So the North is doing extremely well. Now, the Democrats in the South are still being supported by those free trade supporters and the farmers and the immigrants. So you can see how in the South, where agriculture was still very strong, these people were still kind of supporting that Democrat Party. Obviously, after the Civil War and after the death of Lincoln, Ulysses S. Grant is elected because he is obviously the general of the Union Army and is very prominent, and he gets elected in 1868 and serves until 1876. Now, about the turn of the century and a little after, you have all this innovation going on. America is growing by leaps and bounds economically, and we're about to enter a period where we're going to start banking on all that innovation, and literally banking, because we are going to start. The Democrats are basically what we call progressives today. And that was started by Teddy Roosevelt, because even though he ran under the Bull Moose Party, that was a progressive party. Okay, they were called progressives. What you see here is that the progressives are looking at this massive wealth that America has started to build. And wealth is power, okay? And they want to be able to manipulate that power and secure that wealth. So what the Progressive Party is doing is saying, hey, we need to strengthen this Democrat Party, and we need to get in here, and we're going to push our policies on you now. And this starts to happen with President Woodrow Wilson. And he serves as a Democrat, but basically he is a progressive. He serves from 1913 to 1921. And there is significant amount of, if you look at some of the amendments to the Constitution that were put in at this time, you will start to see the momentum the Democrats have achieved at this point, because they are starting to pass amendments to the Constitution with progressive ideology in them. Now, let's look at generally the past 100 years of political party activity. Now we just have pretty much two parties, and they are going to dominate for these 100 years. And they're pretty much going to serve equal time during these 100 years. But there are times when they are serving for a significant length of time. Franklin Roosevelt is going to continue that progressive movement, okay? And he won 4 terms. So the Democratic Party generally favors, at this time, they have come to favor more centralized government, okay? With Franklin Roosevelt, we had the New Deal, the beginnings of Social Security. They heavily support labor unions. They are the ones that bring forth the income tax, the 16th Amendment. Okay, they supported that and passed that and got that ratified. They obviously were in power with Obama and created this government health care system that we now call Obamacare. They also created Medicare and Medicaid. Then that is health care for elderly as well as indigent persons. And they are huge backers of environmental controls. Now, you have also, on the Republican side, you have a lot of years where the Republicans were strong for several years. And one of these is during the time of President Ronald Reagan from 1980 to 1988. But his vice president, George Bush, went on to win another term. So you've got 12 years, over a decade of Republicans serving at that time as well. The Republicans generally favor limited government control, limited government reach into and down to the states or over individuals. They're trying to constrain that. They also support lower taxes. They oppose this idea of the welfare state, which includes, things like the New Deal, welfare, obviously welfare, Social Security, entitlements, and things like that. They encourage free markets. They're very much about not regulating them so much. They are usually proponents of a strong military force. They're proponents of strong national sovereignty within the world. And this typically manifests itself in supporting America as a sovereign nation when it comes to the United Nations or the international governing body. And of course, they're very supportive of gun rights. Okay, these are the typical areas of the policies, but candidates can, lean one way or the other, and almost, some Republicans almost lean over pretty far into supporting Democratic ideas. And then you have some Democrats who are very conservative, and they're over here, supporting a lot of Republican ideas. But for the most part, we're just down to 2 major American parties. Now, I want to introduce this concept, if you haven't heard of it, of riding coattails. The popularity of a president is influencing people to vote for the party, any party candidate that's falling under that president's party. And that's called riding coattails. So members of Congress running during the elections of Reagan would have been supposedly said to have, because so many of them won their elections, it's said that they were riding the coattails of Reagan, because if it weren't for him, there wouldn't be so many people coming to the polls voting, and even voting down ballot, which means you're voting not just for the president, but you're going down the ballot and voting for those members of Congress that are running at the same time. So that's riding coattails. And also the idea of a landslide election. A landslide election is very much like when you think of a landslide. When you see the side of a mountain, like when they show that in California, and you just see whole sections of dirt and rock, sliding down the side of this mountain and just obliterating everything in its path. Sometimes when an election is so strong and a candidate is so strong, they win by this overwhelming amount. And that's called a landslide victory. And President Reagan's second presidential election was a landslide victory for him. He won nearly 60% of the popular vote. And he won 49 of the 50 states when it came to the electoral vote. Okay, this is absolutely significant, and no one has done that since he was elected in 1984 for a second term. His opponent, Walter Mondale, who did have the first female running mate, Geraldine Ferraro, their ticket got one state's electoral votes, and that was the state of Minnesota. Now, they also did receive the District of Columbia. Okay, we're going to talk about third parties, and then we're going to take a break and talk about parties in general and how they're structured. Okay, now we're not bound constitutionally to a two-party system. It just so happens that's how it works out. But there have been some strong third parties and some significant third parties in America's history. However, for the most part, a lot of voters feel like if they vote for that third party, it's kind of a throwaway vote because the party doesn't have enough significant support to win, and people don't want to have their vote be insignificant. Typically, third parties are special interest parties. They have like one significant interest. I mean, very much like the abolitionist. It was such a strong goal that it did capture the entire nation's support. It being the Republicans with Abraham Lincoln. But a lot of times these more modern day third parties it's a special interest, and it just doesn't capture the support of the entire nation. In 1872, there was actually Hillary Clinton is not the first woman to run for president. Actually, there was a ticket that was a woman for president and an African American as her vice presidential candidate. And their ticket was Woodhull Douglas, and they represented the Equal Rights Party in 1872. And that was composed of Victoria Woodhull, a women's suffrage or women's rights leader, and Frederick Douglass, which was obviously supporting equal rights for African Americans. You also have the Dixiecrats, which are basically Southern Democrats that are opposing this civil rights movement that's going on. There's the Green Party of 1996 that started support for environmental controls. You have the Libertarian Party, which is an interesting mix of socially, they're very liberal when it comes to issues of abortion, religious freedom. They don't want to see that moral code that we keep referring to. They don't want to see that seeding into the political system, or not the political system, but the governing system. So they're a little resistant to that moral code being enforced. And also, on the flip side, they're fiscally very conservative. So they want to see the government back off, and they're actually big supporters of free market economics and less government control, less government regulation in the markets. You also see third parties that are really just splinters off of a party, and that would be the Bull Moose Party. Teddy Roosevelt started this party, which is essentially, and it even says on there, it is the Progressive Party. He had run Republican, and now he was running on this Progressive or Bull Moose Party ticket. Now, sometimes a third party can be extremely significant in the outcome of an election, and this happened in 1992 when Ross Perot, who was a businessman, ran under a third party called the Reform Party. And basically, it was a very fiscally conservative party. He ended up garnering like 19% of the vote. This basically made it almost a three-way split. And because he was appealing to more Republicans, he was taking votes away from George H. Bush, the incumbent president at the time. And George H. Bush ended up losing this election because Ross Perot's votes had pretty much diluted his voting share. This gave Bill Clinton the majority of the electoral votes, and he ended up winning the election, actually with less than the majority of the popular vote. So it was kind of a bizarre twist of events that led to the significant weakening of a candidate and the victory of a candidate that wasn't necessarily that strong. So third parties, even though they seem like they kind of skirt around the edge of this two-party system, they can at sometimes come in and make history, and Ross Perot certainly did that in 1992. All right, go ahead and take a break. We're going to come back and start looking at political parties themselves, their hierarchy, and how they manifest themselves in presidential elections. All right, welcome back. We're going to start with political parties, and we're talking about this hierarchy. And when I refer to this hierarchy, basically we're talking about the two major political parties, the Republicans and the Democrats. Some third parties have a hierarchy similar to this, but they're not nearly as strong and as resilient as the two major parties. Okay, I want to make the distinction between voting for a candidate who's in a particular party and actually being a member of the party. So when you go to vote, let's say you go and you vote for a Democrat. That doesn't mean that you have joined the Democratic Party. Now, you may have shown support for it, but you're not necessarily active in the party itself. That's a totally different animal, okay? Now, when there are primaries, so primaries are where you have, it's open season on an office, and you have, let's say you have three candidates running on the Republican ticket, so running under the Republican Party head, and four running under the Democratic Party. You have to have a primary to sift out and vote for one leader that's going to represent that party for that office in the major election or the general election that's typically in November. So typically in Texas, it's in March. We have our primaries held in March. And we go in and say there are three candidates for U.S. Senate. We're going to go vote in the primary election and say, this is the candidate I want running under the Republican Party. Or you're going to go into the Democrat, you're literally split at lines when you walk in the door. Okay, and you're going to have to choose which primary you're going to vote in. Okay, you are choosing a party at that time. Now, you're not bound to that party when it comes to the general election. You could vote, and this has to do with open and closed primaries. In some states, they do not allow you to cross over. So if you voted Republican in the primary, you can't come vote for a Republican, for a Democrat in the general election. You've got to stick with the party you chose. But in Texas, we have open primaries, which allows you to cross over and vote in the Republican Party, but then later vote in the Democratic Party when it comes time for the general election. It's a strategy that particularly the Democrats are extremely adept at using this strategy. They will vote for weaker candidates so that a weak candidate will win that primary and be the representative for the Republican Party in the general election. Okay, that's a very strategic thing to do if you want to undercut and have an advantage in the general election for your party's candidate. If you just have some of your party members go in and elect that weaker candidate, then your candidate, your Democrat candidate, has a better chance of winning the general election. Okay, this happens all the time. But like I said, not all states have open primaries. Some of them are closed, and you wouldn't be able to do that. But in, say for Texas, it's an open primary, and that could happen. Now, this has nothing to do with the structure of the party itself. When you vote, you're just voting. You're participating in electing someone from a particular party, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're active in that party. If you're an active participant in a political party, you're seeing a structure that starts down at the precinct level. A precinct is the actual location where you vote. A precinct is basically within walking distance of where you lived. Now, just because you're voting doesn't necessarily mean that you're participating in the party activities. Political parties are basically like social clubs, and I don't mean to color them in any light. I'm just saying they are groups of people who want to be active in the political system, and they're choosing to be with a certain party that has a certain ideology, and it has a structure to it, and candidates come out of those parties, but not everybody who participates in that political party is a candidate. Usually they're there just structuring the political they're there to support the ideology of that party. So, if you have someone who's running for Senate coming out of the Republican Party, he has been approved by that party to run on that party's platform. It run on the beliefs that party holds to be important. Okay, so, and it has a whole structure, and this is not something delineated by the Constitution. These literally rise up on their own. These parties have risen up on their own as far as public support. And how they maintain their parties is very important to the success of their candidates. So they are on this structure very much like our national government is on a structure. It's very similar to that structure. So you have down here, which would basically be the local level, and that's the precinct level. That's where you vote. So in the Republican Party, everybody that wants to participate in the Republican Party will meet with the other people in their precinct, and they will start to at that very basic structure. Now, they may not only participate there, but they're participating at the county level. So you have, over here on the right, you have the county party chairs, and they're very influential on who comes in and who can be recommended for different types of elected positions. They have a lot of influence at that county level, okay, on many races in that county level. Specific political parties can't decide who's going to win the election. What they do is the voters decide who's going to win the election, obviously, but the political party has a lot of power in influencing and supporting those candidates publicly so that they will win. Okay, that's the role of the political party. Now, there are committees and conventions going on, or little caucuses going on at each level of this hierarchy. And once you start leaving the county and you move up to the state, it's like little elections as party members. They're not necessarily running for an office. They're running to be delegates to the national convention. And they're starting down at the precinct level saying, I want to go to the county level and be a delegate to that county level and have voting power in that, quote, social club action at the county level. Okay? Not voting power for a candidate, voting power inside the party itself. Okay? This is where all the party power starts to be cultivated. So they're literally moving up in the party through these caucuses and conventions and trying to win votes as delegates to the next step. So you're at the state, that say you make it from your precinct to your county to your state, and it's an election year, and you really want to go to that national convention as a delegate. Because when you get there, you're saying, this is the person I want. And, when it comes to the big races, obviously, this is the person I want to nominate as the candidate for the Republican Party or the Democratic Party in this presidential election. Okay? In other words, you're voting. You're saying, yes, you are actually voting for this candidate to be the candidate in the general election. And when I say general election, that means people who don't even participate in the party can go to the polls and vote for whoever it is they want. But what's happening is that person got on the ballot because the political party put them there. Okay? Those delegates that aren't running for that office are voting and saying, yes, we say that this person can be on the ballot for president of the United States when it comes time for that election to happen. That's the influence, okay? They are choosing that nominee. So obviously in this previous election, the Democratic Party catapulted Hillary Clinton up to her status as nominee of the Democratic Party for president of the United States. And of course, the Republican Party nominated Donald Trump as the nominee. And then the public came in and decided, okay, we're going to choose from these two. And when a third party or other parties have promoted a candidate, sometimes you don't hear about them because they don't make a big splash. They're not very strong, but they're on that If you go and vote, there are several people. There's more than just two people running for president. There are several. Usually, there might be 4 or 5 people on there because somehow they've managed to get on the ballot through some means. But when it comes to the parties, you're seeing those two top parties offering a nominee as a candidate for president of the United States. And when you see a candidate that has been nominated by a certain party, that candidate is obligated to the party to uphold the ideas. And we're going to talk about a platform, which is these ideas put into written form. That nominee is expected to uphold that platform, and if elected, they're going to draw their public policy from that platform that was created by the political party. So if you're interested in participating in the political party, you want to start by going to your precinct caucus or your precinct, quote, convention. Now, there may be no precinct convention because no one is interested from that precinct in doing anything. But what is supposed to happen is after every primary, so every 2 years, you're going to have an opportunity, literally at the end of the day, typically, if not sometime very soon thereafter, in the next 2 weeks, there's going to be a meeting of all the voters that went to vote in that primary. And they're going to get together and elect someone to go to the county level. Okay, so that's how these people are moving up in the political party. But you're not necessarily seeing them because they're not being elected to a public office necessarily. They are literally just moving up the ranks of this social club. Okay, so every 2 years there's a state convention, and then every 4 years there's a national convention where you're moving. If you're a state delegate, you're trying to get elected to go to that national convention because that's going to happen in that presidential year. And these platforms we talked about are basically faith statements of the party. It's what they believe in. It's what they want to see happen. They're very specifically made documents that comprise what that party believes should be government policy. And that goes with the candidates. So that's another interesting aspect of political parties, that maybe if you're not so much interested in the candidates and getting the candidates nominated, you're interested in the more fundamental principles of the party and you want to have an influence in that. You want to be active in these different levels of the party so that you can influence what's on that platform statement, because that really defines the party. Okay, and if your participation begins at the precinct. So if you just want to get started, you just need to, and sometimes you got to dig, okay, but you just need to start going to that precinct convention. And it may be one person, it may be two persons, it may be a whole group of people, but you want to start there so that you can start participating at every level and possibly becoming active in those elections as a delegate. And realize that all of this, political party members are not paid members. I mean, some may be at the higher levels, but for the most part, this is your social club moment, and you are paying for all this travel and expense and time. Okay, just so you know, these are not paid positions necessarily. But you got to remember, if you care about politics and government and you want to participate, then you need to participate, because if you're not doing it, who is? Okay? Somebody's doing that, playing that role for you and defining that party that you're voting for you. So I'd encourage you, if you're interested, get involved. Start at the precinct and just watch what's going on and get involved if you feel compelled to do so. All right, let's talk about fundraising, election fundraising. A huge issue, very important, and in my opinion, a necessary evil that is required to make sure happens in order to get your candidate elected. Because there's a lot, like I said, there's a lot of expense involved, and these parties are trying to promote their candidate, and that's basically a marketing and advertising job, and they are having to spend money to get these candidates' faces before the voters so that the voter can say, oh yes, I remember this person, I know their name, when I go to the poll, I want to vote for them. Okay, and they spent a heck of a lot of time and effort and money promoting candidates, especially when we get into the presidential election year. Okay, let's talk about some of these fundraising amounts from this previous election. So on the right, you have that Hillary Clinton raised, it says $1.191 million, but what that translates into is $1.2 billion to promote her presidential campaign. Okay, and Donald Trump raised about $600 million. Now, that's a significant difference. I mean, we're talking half the amount. And how did Trump get more? How did he manage to get elected on, half the amount of money spent? Because obviously in this case, it didn't translate into a presidential election for Hillary Clinton, and surprisingly so. And you could see the stark surprise on their faces at the end game, at the election when she didn't win, because Trump had not spent a whole lot of money. So what did he do? Well, Trump spent about $66 million of his own money to finance his campaign, and he raised $339 million and ended up spending under that. So they didn't go into debt doing all this. But what happened was Trump was such a charismatic candidate that the television coverage, the television and the media stepped out to cover him. In other words, they gave him coverage and FaceTime that he didn't necessarily pay for. He was just so charismatic, and they were just, what is this guy going to say next kind of thing, that they wanted to be there because that helps their ratings. And so he kind of benefited from that whole, even stuff that really didn't seem to help him, it still got his face in front of the voters. Okay, and they estimate that the amount of free television coverage, free television FaceTime, was about $5 billion. So that is extremely significant. Now you can kind of see where maybe when the numbers come out in the wash as far as how much was raised for these candidates, the amount of coverage that they got in order to be elected was actually quite different. And Trump absolutely overwhelmed the television coverage, and therefore probably got his face out there to a lot of voters that may not have recognized him or known about him before. Okay, now over on the left, where you see Texas spending by Trump and Clinton, you see down at the bottom there's a graph, and what it's showing is the differences. Okay, the percent differences of fundraising. So if you see a square that's blue, that's generally the color for Democrats, and red is the color for Republicans. If you see blue, Hillary Clinton raised more money in that county than Donald Trump did, and by a significant amount. So in Harris County, that was the biggest difference. Now, if you look through here, you can see that in the counties that had big urban populations, in other words, those big cities, those counties raised a lot of money for Hillary Clinton. But she did not win Texas. Okay, but nevertheless, it's showing the amount of fundraising that was raised. So Harris County, which is Houston, okay, the biggest difference was there. Dallas County went to Hillary Clinton as far as fundraising. Bexar County is San Antonio. That went to Hillary Clinton. Travis County is Austin. I mean, we're pretty much gathering up all the biggest urban areas. Okay, so Travis County went to Hillary Clinton. Tarrant County is Fort Worth, which tends to be more conservative. So that went to Donald Trump, and Collin County as well, and then going on down to these little smaller counties. But what you're seeing there, and the pattern that you should notice, is that large urban areas were voting for Hillary Clinton. But as you can see from this diagram here, it's red when you get down into the smaller counties. And this diagram is extremely significant when it comes to representing how Donald Trump won this past election. Now, if you'll think back to when we did the executive branch and I showed you the election map from this past election, and it showed how Trump had won so many states, but if you looked at it by the counties on the national map, he had won so many rural counties that it overwhelmed the amount of numbers of counties that Clinton had won that were urban, very dense urban counties. So this shows it on the Texas level, but you should know that this translated out into the national map as well. And urban areas typically go for a Democratic candidate, and rural areas tend to be more conservative, and that is how Donald Trump won. He overwhelmed the votes, the electoral votes, by capturing all these small counties. Okay, let's move on. I mean, we could talk forever about this stuff, but, I don't want to make this a super long lecture. So let's move on to what they're actually doing with this money. Okay, how are they trying to influence the voter? Well, they're buying a lot of campaign advertisements, and those generally translate into commercials you see on TV. So I want to, obviously, I don't have the rights to show these campaign videos because they would have sold them to a television station, and I can't put them on here. But I'm going to put links to them next to this lecture, and so you can kind of get an idea of, what they do. They're spending a lot of money on, creating this image. It's all about the image. Okay, and it's all just for you because they want you to vote for that particular candidate. So they will create like very enlightening looks of Donald Trump doing this or that and performing these very positive actions. But then you have the attack ads that come in and really try to cut down the other candidate by bringing up anything that they can think of or make up about the opposing candidate that might hurt their image in the public's eye. So take a look at those ads, and you just kind of get a feel for why there's so much money spent, because they're making these campaign ads and they want to bank off of those as far as votes are concerned. Now, another form of advertisement that's new is the internet. And it is a new weapon in these campaigns, because what it has introduced is, one, speed. They can get this information to you instantly. They send it to you over your email. You can watch these campaign videos like you're about to do over and over and over again on YouTube. They're sending you the YouTube link to the campaign video over the email, or someone who's promoting that candidate is. And on Twitter, they're talking about the candidate, they're promoting the candidate, there's debate about the candidate. On as far as Instagram, same thing, Facebook, same thing. People are texting each other, and in real time, you can see the debate going on. It's not just the night of the big debate on TV anymore. It's right there in your hand. And it's multimedia in your hand. They're speaking, there's video, there's audio, there's just static images of pictures, there's graphic design. I mean, look at the picture of Hillary Clinton over here on the left. They're literally imprinting that logo of "I am with her" on her face and giving you that image of, I'm with her. Well, who are you with? You're with Hillary Clinton. Okay, that's a very powerful image right there. And for Trump, that static image was that "Make America Great Again" that everyone wants to trash, okay? And using that against him in many ways. But that was his motto. That was the campaign talking point right there. We're going to make America great again. And that's what Trump wanted for his image. Okay, it's a revolution in fundraising. Because what happened was, if they can get to you on your phone, and anybody, now everyone typically has a phone, and you don't have to wait for an invitation in the mail or a request in the mail to donate. You can just do it right on the phone. You can pay. And what happened was, especially the Democrats were masters at getting the little tiny contribution of $5. I mean, anybody can give up $5 without blinking an eye hardly. So there was a lot of these really, really small donations coming in. And that's a new thing. That's a relatively novel thing. Now, also, accessibility. I mean, they're coming right to you on your device in real time. Okay, and you can take that information and forward it on to someone else. So it used to be you come home at night, you're watching the evening news, or you're watching TV, and you're watching say one of your favorite sitcoms, and the commercials come up, and here's a commercial for Hillary Clinton or for Trump. Okay, it used to be that's when you saw the campaign advertisement money going into effect. But now you're seeing it on the internet, and you're seeing it right there in your hand every time you open up Facebook, or every time you open up Instagram, Twitter, etc. It's right there. It's freely accessible at any time to any person. Okay, this has totally revolutionized campaigns. Okay, let's finish up by just talking about political party structures in other countries. If you're in a country such as communist China, where there's just basically a one-party system, that party is basically just, there's one party, and they're going to decide issues for an entire nation. Okay, there's no competition there. Okay, just like there isn't any competition in the economy, there's no competition. You're not really going to have room. Typically, there's punishment for objecting to whatever the party wants to do. So if you're not part of the party, your voice is not going to get heard in one of these one-party system nations. Britain typically is very much like us. They're a two-party system, okay? Sometimes they have a significant third party, but for the most part, they're two-party. The other nations typically have multi-party systems. In other words, they don't have two strong parties, but they'll have several minority parties that will form a coalition so that they can secure them. In other words, they will decide, okay, of the ones that are most like us, that most represent ideas, these political parties that are offering nominees for this political position, and maybe it's the highest one in their country, they're going to coalesce together. And the other candidates are going to drop off, and they're going to promote this one candidate. What you're having is a lot of different ideas coming together, and you have multi-parties offering one candidate. In general, when it comes to political parties, freer societies have multiple parties because they believe in everyone having a voice, more than one person having a voice, and ultimately having control. If you're seeing a country that really only has one political party, chances are it's going to be a dictatorship or a communist nation that is trying to hold on to power by controlling that one party and the information coming out of that party and who's coming into the party. Okay, that's their form of control. Because remember, even in these other countries, these parties have members, active members that go all the way down to their, quote, precinct levels. So you're trying to build up support all the way down to someone's neighborhood. And what happens is these political party members are given preferential treatment, when it comes to government decisions, and there's just no two ways around it. They're going to have more power. Those party members are going to have more power than the citizens themselves. And if it's one central power and they're controlled by a dictator, pretty much what the dictator says is going to filter all the way down to that precinct level, because that party member is not going to object, okay, and do something that is counter to the, quote, platform of the dictator. Okay, that's political party systems. And I think we covered a lot of the topics. It's such a vast topic, but we did cover a lot of the information about how they function, especially here in America. We have gone from no political parties to billion-dollar campaigns. I find that a whole study in and of itself. Why does our political party behavior today, what does that say about our society? Just something to think about. When you're rolling around ideas of power and influence, what does that say that we went from no political parties to just absolute cutthroat political parties with billion-dollar campaigns? I'm just going to leave you with that question. Just something to think about. All right, that's going to do it for me today. I hope y'all enjoyed that. Thank you for coming again to class at GW Bridge Academy, and I look forward to speaking to you next time in our next class. Y'all have a great day.